She would wake before the sun even hinted at rising, brew coffee for the entire family, scrub clothes in the freezing wash basin outside, and when she finally lay down at night in the small back room, she could hear her brother's laughter from the room next door, laughter that was never meant for her, until one Christmas in 1928, when a man with soulful eyes truly saw her for the first time, and everything changed. Can you imagine living in your own home like a stranger, serving your own mother as if you were just common help, while your brothers received all the affection that should have been yours too? This happened in the rural Deep South in December 1928, in a small town surrounded by cotton fields where everyone knew everyone and where secrets were whispered behind closed doors but never forgotten. Before we go on, tell me something, you listening to me right now. Where are you watching from? Comment down below. I want to know if you're from the South, the Midwest, the coast, or maybe even across the pond. It doesn't matter where, I just want to know. And go ahead and leave a like to help me keep bringing these stories to you. Now, let's get into Cecily's story, which is going to move you from beginning to end. Cecily was 22 years old that December of 1928, but her honey-colored eyes carried an age that didn't match her years. Her brown hair was always pulled back in a tight bun that started to ache by mid-afternoon, and her hands... Oh, those hands told a story of endless labor, calloused, dry, with nails cut short because there was simply no time to care for them. She was beautiful despite it all, with that kind of beauty that exhaustion tries to hide but can't quite extinguish. Her delicate features, the soft curve of her face, lips that rarely smiled but held a lovely shape. It was all there, stubborn, enduring. The house where Cecily lived stood on the main street of Oakhaven, a two-story structure painted white with blue shutters, surrounded by a garden she tended in her few spare hours. From the outside, it looked welcoming, full of life, with ferns hanging from the porch and a freshly painted gate. But appearances are deceiving, and Cecily knew that better than anyone. Within those white walls, she wasn't a daughter. She was a shadow, a pair of working hands, a voice that only spoke when spoken to. Leonor, Cecily's mother, was 48, her face marked by a bitterness that seemed to have settled there for good. She was a woman who had once been beautiful. You could still see it in her high cheekbones and dark eyes. But now she was cold. A widow for 22 years, exactly Cecily's age, Leonor had never recovered from the loss of her husband. Anthony, the father Cecily never knew, died the day she was born. The labor had been difficult, long and bloody. The midwife later said she'd never seen anything like it. The baby refused to come, and when she finally did, Anthony had no strength left. He had lost too much trying to support his wife through the violent contractions, and his heart had simply stopped. Leonor never forgave Cecily for that. She never said it out loud, of course. Such things aren't spoken, but the body says what the mouth swallows, and everything about Leonor screamed rejection when she looked at her eldest child. She nursed Cecily out of obligation, not love. She changed her diapers in a rush without the sweet cooing mothers offer their babies. As Cecily grew, Leonor found more and more chores for her. By 5, the girl was washing her own clothes. By 7, she was helping in the kitchen. By 10, she was running the entire household, while Leonor took in sewing, making dresses and suits for the wealthy families of the county. Cecily's brothers, Gabriel and Luke, were different. Gabriel was 20, studying to be an accountant, a thin young man with round spectacles who spent his days with his nose buried in math books. Luke was 18 and helped out at the general store in town, but he still had time to play football on Sundays with his friends, to go to church socials, to live. Both received the affection from Leonor that Cecily never knew. Their mother smoothed their hair with tenderness, cooked their favorite meals, asked about their days. With Cecily, the words were short, dry, functional. Wash this. Iron that. The food is cold. You took too long. Cecily slept in a small room at the back of the house, off the kitchen, a cramped space that had originally been a pantry. It had only a narrow cot, an old trunk where she kept her 3 changes of clothes, and a small window overlooking the yard. No mirror, no pretty curtains, nothing that made it a real bedroom. Meanwhile, Gabriel and Luke shared a spacious room upstairs with 2 good beds, a large wardrobe, and windows facing the main street. Meals were another silent torment. Leonor, Gabriel, and Luke sat at the dining room table with a clean tablecloth and the nice china that had belonged to their father. Cecily ate in the kitchen, standing up or sitting on a stool after serving the others, taking what was left. Often it was very little. Other times it was just the scrapings from the pot, the burnt rice, the smallest piece of meat. She never complained. She had learned early on that complaining only made things worse, that silence was her only shield. Cecily's brothers weren't cruel to her, but they were indifferent, and that hurt almost as much as open cruelty. Gabriel sometimes looked at his sister with something resembling pity, but he never said a word, never questioned their mother, never raised a voice in Cecily's defense. Luke was younger and simply accepted that reality as if it were natural, as if some people were born to serve and others to be served. Neither ever offered help when they saw their sister hauling heavy baskets of wet laundry. Neither ever shared the dessert their mother made only for them. Neither ever said it was wrong. Cecily had learned to find small refuges of peace amidst that life. She loved the first minutes of the morning, when she woke before everyone else and the house was silent, when she could look out her small window and see the sky lightening, purple turning to pink, turning to gold. She liked washing clothes at the basin in the yard, because there alone she could hum softly without anyone telling her to hush. She loved tending the garden, seeing the flowers respond to her care, feeling the damp earth in her hands, and knowing that at least there, in that flower bed, she was creating life instead of just serving. There was a wild muscadine vine at the back of the yard, old, with a thick, twisted trunk which bore dark, sweet grapes once a year. Cecily would hide a few in her apron pocket and eat them at night, alone in her little room, savouring each one slowly. It was her small rebellion, her secret pleasure that no one could take from her. The sweet, musky taste of the muscadines was the taste of freedom, even if only for a few seconds. December arrived, bringing the biting chill typical of Georgia winters, though the days could still be surprisingly mild. The air was crisp, and the evenings brought a damp cold that settled into your bones. Cecily liked the smell of wood smoke in the air, liked how the evergreens looked against the grey sky. But December also meant more work. It was time to prepare the house for Christmas, to deep clean everything, to bake special treats, to sew new clothes so Gabriel and Luke could go to the Christmas Eve service looking handsome and respectable. Leonor was especially busy that December. She had received important orders from several wealthy families in the county, gowns for holiday parties, suits for the landowners to wear for the new year. The sewing machine whirred ceaselessly, the rhythmic sound of the needle-piercing fabric filling the house from early morning until late at night. Cecily helped when needed, cutting threads, sorting buttons, pressing the finished pieces with the heavy iron she heated on the wood stove. Her hands were frequently burned as she tested the iron's temperature, small red marks that stung but which she ignored. On the afternoon of December 23rd, 3 days before Christmas, Leonor called Cecily into the sewing room. The woman was hunched over a dark green dress, fine fabric, elegant neckline, clearly meant for someone very wealthy. Cecily stood in the doorway, waiting. Leonor didn't look up from her sewing as she spoke. "You're going to deliver these orders tomorrow morning to the Rosewood estate," she said, with a tired, impatient voice. 3 dresses for the lady of the house and her daughters, and 2 suits for the gentleman and his son. Everything is wrapped over there in the corner, marked with names. You leave at dawn, take everything, collect the payment, and be back before noon. Don't be late. I need that money to buy things for Christmas dinner." Cecily nodded in silence. Rosewood Estate was 5 miles from town, a long walk, but one she had made a few times before delivering orders. She knew the way, down the dirt road that wound between the hills, past smaller farms, crossing a little wooden bridge over a noisy creek, up the big hill where the main gate of Rosewood stood. It was one of the largest estates in the region, owned by the Vance family for 3 generations, known for their high-quality cotton and prize-winning cattle. Leonora finally raised her eyes and fixed her daughter with that empty expression Cecily knew so well. "Wear something decent tomorrow," she said sharply. "Don't go there looking like a beggar. It shames us." Cecily lowered her eyes, feeling the heat of humiliation rise up her neck. She only had 3 dresses, all patched, all faded by the sun and constant washing. The most decent one was a light blue calico with small white flowers, which had been hers since she was a teenager and was now too tight across the chest and too short in the legs, but at least it had no visible holes. That was the one she would wear. That night, Cecily washed the blue dress with care, scrubbing the soap well into the stubborn stains, rinsing several times until the water ran clear. She wrung it out with strength and hung it on the line under the back porch, where it would be protected if it rained or frosted overnight. She ran a fine-tooth comb through her hair, trying to tame it, trying to look presentable. She didn't have good shoes, just an old pair of cracked leather boots that pinched her toes, but they would have to do. She went to bed early that night, but sleep was slow to come. Through her tiny window, she could see the stars shining in the dark sky, thousands of them, and she lay there imagining what it would be like to live a different life, a life where someone looked at her with affection, where someone asked if she was tired, where someone cared. She woke while it was still dark, the neighbor's rooster just beginning to crow in the distance. She dressed in the silence of her little room, the blue dress still slightly damp and cold against her skin. She pinned up her hair as best she could, tying it with a worn ribbon. She pulled on the boots, ignoring the pinch. In the kitchen, she ate a piece of stale biscuit with a little reheated coffee, quickly, standing up, watching through the window, as the sky began to lighten on the horizon. She picked up the packages Leonora had left prepared, 4 large bundles wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine, and a smaller one with the suits. It was quite a load, but she was used to carrying heavy things. She left the house as the first rays of sun began to paint the sky orange and pink. The streets of the town were still empty, just a few stray dogs rummaging for scraps, and the baker opening the door of the bakery, the smell of fresh bread escaping into the street. Cecily walked fast, the bundles in her arms, feeling the weight increase with every block, but not slowing her pace. The faster she got there, the faster she would return, and the less chance she would have of meeting anyone she knew on the road who might ask questions, who might look at her with pity or disdain. The road to Rosewood Estate was beautiful at that time of morning. The sun rose slowly, illuminating the hills covered in winter fields, the tall pines casting long shadows across the path, the birds starting their shrill songs. The air was crisp, with that scent of damp pine needles and red clay that Cecily had always loved. Her feet began to ache inside the tight boots, but she kept going, steady, focused on arriving. She passed Colonel Augustus's farm, then the Miller property, both waking up for the day's work with smoke rising from the chimneys and distant voices of farmhands. She reached the little wooden bridge over the creek and stopped for a moment, setting the bundles on the ground to catch her breath. The water ran fast and clear below, making that soothing sound of water over stones. Cecily dipped her hands, splashing the cold water onto her face, feeling the immediate relief of the coolness on her flushed skin. She drank a few sips from her cupped hands, the icy water sliding down her throat. For a moment, standing there on that little bridge, alone with the sound of the water and the birds, she felt almost free. But there was no time for daydreaming. She picked up the bundles again and continued. The climb up the big hill was the hardest part. Her legs burning with the effort, her breathing becoming heavy, sweat starting to trickle down her back. When she finally reached the top and saw the gate of Rosewood Estate, she let out a relieved sigh. The property stretched out enormous before her, green pastures where Holstein cows grazed peacefully, sturdy dark wood fences, grand oak trees shading the driveway that led to the main house. And the main house, that house was something to behold. The Rosewood Manor was an imposing two-story structure, painted white with dark trim, wide verandas with columns, a slate roof that gleamed in the sun. It had large windows with real glass panes, white lace curtains visible from the outside, a front garden impeccably tended with winter camellias and holly bushes. Cecily stood looking for a few seconds, imagining what it would be like to live in a place like that. What it would be like to wake up in a real bed, in a room with big windows. What it would be like to sit on one of those porches and drink coffee looking out at the vastness of the estate. She took a deep breath, adjusted the bundles in her arms, and walked to the front door. There was a bell pull hanging beside the door, and she tugged it. A chime tinkled inside, clear and cheerful. She waited, her heart beating a little faster with nervousness. She didn't know why she was nervous. She had been here other times, but there was something different this morning, something in the air she couldn't name. The door opened, and a middle-aged woman appeared, plump, with a kind face and a clean apron, likely the housekeeper. "Good morning, miss," the woman said with a smile. Cecily returned the greeting and explained she was bringing the sewing orders from Mrs. Leonor for the family. The housekeeper, who introduced herself as Marietta, told her to come in and wait in the parlour beside the entrance while she went to fetch the lady of the house. Cecily entered timidly, clutching the bundles to her chest. The parlour was simple but elegant, with two dark green velvet armchairs, a marble-topped centre table, a sideboard with a porcelain vase full of fresh holly and ivy. The floor was wide planks of waxed wood that shone, and there was a wall clock ticking softly, rhythmically. Cecily didn't sit. She didn't feel she had the right. She stood there, looking at the floor, waiting. But while she waited, she heard voices coming from the back of the house, one masculine and deep, another childish and animated. Footsteps approached, and Cecily looked up just as a man entered the parlour from the side hallway. He stopped when he saw her, and she stopped breathing for a second. Edward Vance was 38 years old, and the kind of man who commanded attention without trying. Tall, with broad shoulders of someone who worked the land, dark hair with a few grey strands at the temples, dark green eyes that seemed to see beneath the surface of things. He had a strong masculine face, with a defined jawline, straight nose, a well-shaped mouth. He wore riding breeches and a white shirt with sleeves rolled up to the elbows, revealing muscular, tanned forearms. There was something about him that conveyed both authority and gentleness, strength and compassion. He looked at Cecily, and she lowered her eyes immediately, embarrassed. "Good morning," he said, his voice deep but soft. Cecily murmured a "good morning" back, so quiet it was barely audible. Edward took a few steps into the room, and at that moment, a small girl appeared behind him, holding onto his leg. Clara was 7 years old, dark hair in 2 braids, eyes just like her father's, green and bright, cheeks rosy with health. She looked at Cecily with disarming, childish curiosity. Edward asked if she was waiting for someone. Cecily explained she was bringing the sewing orders from Mrs. Leonor for the lady of the estate. Upon saying her mother's name, she saw something flash across Edward's face. A flicker of recognition, followed by something that looked like pity. He asked her name. "Cecily," she replied, her voice still low, almost ashamed to say her own name. "Cecily who?" he asked gently. "Cecily Santos," she completed. Edward nodded slowly, as if processing information. "So you are Mrs. Leonora's daughter," he said, and it wasn't a question. It was a realization. Cecily confirmed she was. Edward stood looking at her for a few more seconds, and Cecily felt her cheeks heat up under that gaze. But it wasn't a look that made her feel bad. It wasn't like her mother's look, cold and judging. It was a different look, attentive, almost concerned, as if he were seeing things she didn't want anyone to see. Marietta returned at that moment accompanied by an elegant lady of about 50, grey hair in an impeccable bun, a high-quality dark dress. Edward's mother, Mrs. Helen Vance. The woman greeted Cecily politely, asked to see the orders. Cecily opened the bundles carefully, showing the dresses and suits. Mrs. Helen examined each piece with attention, running her fingers over the fabric, checking the seams, the finishing. She said everything was perfect as always, that Mrs. Leonora was the best seamstress in the county. Cecily thanked her on her mother's behalf and stood there waiting for payment. Mrs. Helen asked Marietta to fetch the money from the study. While the housekeeper went to get it, the lady struck up a conversation, asking if Cecily had walked all that way. She confirmed she had. Mrs. Helen made a sound of disapproval and said it was too far for a young lady to walk alone carrying weight. Cecily gave a shy smile and said she was used to it, that she didn't mind. Edward, who remained standing there watching the scene, spoke up. He said that when she left, he would have one of the farmhands escort her at least halfway back, that it wasn't safe. Cecily wanted to refuse, to say she didn't need it, but the words died in her throat when Edward looked directly at her and said with gentle firmness that it wasn't a favor, it was the right thing to do. Clara, the little girl, had approached Cecily and was looking at her with that unfiltered childish curiosity. "You're pretty," the child said suddenly. Cecily didn't know what to answer, blushing to the roots of her hair. No one had ever said she was pretty. No one had ever noticed her that way. Mrs. Helen laughed and said her granddaughter was very talkative, apologized. But Edward didn't laugh. He looked at his daughter and said she was right, that Cecily was indeed pretty. The way he said it, serious, sincere, without a trace of cheap flattery, made something stir in Cecily's chest, something she didn't know how to name. Marietta returned with the money in an envelope. Mrs. Helen handed it to Cecily, who tucked it carefully into the deep pocket of her dress. She thanked them, gave a small curtsy and turned to leave. But Edward told her to wait a moment. He left the room and returned seconds later with a paper-wrapped bundle. "Take this for you all," he said. "It's a fruitcake we made here. We have plenty left over." Cecily hesitated, not wanting to accept charity, but Edward held out the bundle with such a kind smile that she couldn't refuse. She took the cake, thanked him softly, and finally left. Outside, the sun was high and warm. A young man, one of the farm workers, was already waiting for her as Edward had ordered. He introduced himself as Jim and said he would walk with her to the bridge. They walked together, Jim talking about the farm, about how the boss was a fair man, how he treated everyone well, how little Clara was the joy of the whole house since her mother had died 3 years ago. Cecily listened in silence, absorbing every piece of information, every detail. Jim said the boss had been a widower since then, that he hadn't looked at another woman since his wife passed from typhoid fever, that he dedicated himself only to his daughter and the farm, that he was a good man, the best you could work for. When they reached the bridge, Jim said goodbye and turned back. Cecily continued alone, but now her head was full of thoughts she couldn't organize. The image of Edward kept coming back to her mind. Those green eyes that seemed to look right through her, that deep voice saying she was pretty, that kind gesture of sending someone to walk with her. No one had ever cared about her like that. No one had ever looked at her as if she were someone who deserved care. She arrived home before noon, as her mother had ordered. Leonora was in the sewing room, and Cecily handed over the envelope with the money. Her mother counted the bills, confirmed everything was right, and put it away without saying thank you, without asking if the walk had been tiring, without caring. Cecily showed the fruitcake she had been given. Leonora took the bundle, opened it, examined the rich cake studded with candied fruits and nuts, and said it would be for Christmas dinner. Cecily knew she wouldn't eat a single crumb of it, that it would be shared between Leonora, Gabriel, and Luke. But she said nothing. She was used to it. The next 2 days were a blur of Christmas preparations. Cecily cleaned the entire house until it shone, washed all the linens, waxed the parlour floor, cleaned the windows until the glass was invisible. She helped Leonora in the kitchen preparing the feast, killed and plucked the chicken, made the cornbread dressing, prepared the rice, peeled potatoes until her hands were numb. Gabriel and Luke got new clothes that Leonora had sewn. Cecily would wear the same blue dress she had used to go to the farm, the only one remotely presentable. On the morning of December 25th, Christmas Day, the house woke up in a festive mood. Leonora was in high spirits, a rare thing because of the money that had come in from the orders. Gabriel and Luke were excited about their new clothes, preening in front of the mirror, slicking their hair back with pomade. Cecily prepared breakfast for everyone, served, cleaned, as always. The church service would be at 10 in the morning, and Leonora insisted on arriving early to get a good seat where everyone could see how well-dressed and well-cared for her family was. The 4 of them left together for the church, but Cecily walked a few paces behind as if she didn't really belong to that group. The Church of Our Lady of Sorrows stood in the centre of town, an old and beautiful building with white walls and bell towers, always full on Sundays and packed on holy days. That Christmas, the church was decked with greenery and white flowers, candles burning on the altar, the nativity scene set up in a corner with hand-painted clay figures. The bell tolled, calling the faithful, and people converged from all directions, whole families dressed in their Sunday best. Leonora entered the church, with her head held high, greeting acquaintances Gabriel and Luke by her side. Cecily slipped in behind, discreetly, and went to sit in a pew further back. But at that moment, something happened that would change everything. The Vance family arrived. Edward entered the church holding little Clara's hand, and behind them came Mrs. Helen and 2 young men who must have been other sons or nephews. The family was well known and respected, and several people turned to greet them. Edward responded to the greetings politely, but his eyes scanned the church until, suddenly, they stopped. He had seen Cecily. Edward's green eyes met Cecily's honey-coloured ones, and for a moment the world seemed to stop. He gave a small, discreet smile, an almost imperceptible nod. Cecily felt her face catch fire, lowered her eyes quickly, her heart racing inside her chest in a way she had never felt before. When she looked up again, she saw Edward being led by his mother to the front pews, reserved for important families. But before turning away, he looked at her one more time, and there was something in that look that Cecily couldn't understand, but which made her feel something strange and good at the same time. The service began with Father Anselm celebrating, his deep voice echoing off the ancient walls of the church, speaking of the birth of Jesus, of hope and renewal, of how the babe born in the manger brought light to the world. Cecily tried to pay attention, but her eyes kept drifting to the front, where Edward sat with his daughter on his lap. She could see the back of his neck, his dark, well-cut hair, his broad shoulders under the dark suit. At one point, as if sensing he was being watched, Edward turned his head slightly and looked back, straight at her. Cecily looked away so fast she almost hurt her neck, feigning sudden fascination with the stained glass window on the side. When the service ended, people began to leave slowly, chatting, exchanging Merry Christmas wishes, men shaking hands, women kissing cheeks. Cecily stood up and was leaving when she heard Leonora's voice calling her with irritation. "Cecily, you forgot my purse on the pew. Go back and get it." Cecily obeyed immediately, went back inside the church, which was already almost empty. She found her mother's purse on the pew where they had sat and picked it up. But when she turned to leave, she almost bumped into someone. It was Edward. He was standing there, as if he had been waiting for her. "Sorry, I startled you," he said with a soft smile. Cecily shook her head, unable to form words. Edward asked if she was well, if she had got home safely the other day. Cecily nodded yes, still clutching her mother's purse to her chest like a shield. "I'm glad," he said. And then, after a pause, he added something that seemed to come out of nowhere but which he had clearly thought about before. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, you can come to Rosewood Estate. We help." Cecily looked up in surprise, meeting those green eyes fixed on her with an intensity that disarmed her. "Thank you, sir," she managed to say with a trembling voice. Edward smiled again, and said she didn't need to call him sir, that Edward was fine. Then he nodded and left, leaving Cecily standing there, confused, her heart beating out of rhythm. Outside, Leonora was impatient, complaining that Cecily always dawdled, always did things slowly. She snatched the purse from her daughter's hand with a sharp tug and started walking back home. On the way, they met several acquaintances, and Leonora stopped to chat, to receive compliments on how handsome her sons looked, how Gabriel was grown and serious, how Luke was turning into a fine young man. No one mentioned Cecily, and she stayed always a few steps behind, invisible as ever. It was during one of these stops, while Leonora was talking to Mrs. Mercedes from the grocery store, that the moment Cecily would never forget happened. Leonora was bragging about the orders she had fulfilled, about how much money had come in, and Mrs. Mercedes asked who had delivered the orders to Rosewood Estate. Leonora replied with disdain. Cecily took them, who else, indicating her daughter with a nod of her head, as if pointing out a common servant. "She's useful for those things," she added with a short, cold laugh. Cecily felt something break inside her. It wasn't the first time she had heard her mother refer to her that way, but for the first time, after having been looked at with kindness and respect by Edward, those words hurt in a new, deeper way. She lowered her head, bit her lower lip hard so as not to cry right there in the street, in front of everyone. Mrs. Mercedes looked at Cecily with something like pity, but said nothing. No one ever said anything. They arrived home, and Leonora ordered Cecily to finish preparing dinner while she and the boys rested. Cecily went to the hot kitchen, lit the stove, finished roasting the chicken, prepared the dressing, warmed the rice. The smell of good food filled the house, that Christmas smell, but she knew she would taste very little of it. She set the dining room table with the nice cloth, the good plates, the cutlery only used on special occasions. In the center, she placed the fruitcake Edward had given, now cut into neat slices arranged on a platter. Leonora, Gabriel, and Luke sat at the table when everything was ready. Cecily served each of them, placing the best parts of the chicken, the well-seasoned dressing, the fluffy rice on their plates. Then she retreated to the kitchen and ate her portion, much smaller, the parts no one wanted. The chicken neck, the dressing from the bottom of the pan that had gotten dry, the rice that had stuck. She didn't eat fruitcake. It wasn't offered. But as she ate alone there in the kitchen, Cecily couldn't stop thinking about Edward's words. "If you need anything, you can come to Rosewood Estate." Why had he said that? What had he seen in her that made him offer help? Did he know? Did everyone in town know how she was treated by her own mother, and no one had ever cared enough to say anything? Night fell, and the house went quiet. Cecily washed all the dishes, put everything away, cleaned the kitchen until not a crumb remained. Then she went to her little room and lay on the narrow bed, looking at the dark ceiling. And there, alone, for the first time in a long time, she let the tears fall. She cried in silence, the pillow muffling her sobs. She cried for the life she had, for the mother who didn't love her, for the brothers who didn't defend her. But she also cried for something else, something new that had been born inside her that day. She cried because for the first time someone had looked at her as if she mattered, And that, at the same time it warmed her heart, also hurt, because it showed how much she had lived without it, how much she had accepted crumbs when she deserved the whole feast. The days following Christmas passed slowly for Cecily, each one the same as the last, waking before the sun, working until nightfall, lying exhausted in the back room. But there was something different now, something she carried inside her chest, like a small ember that refused to go out. The memory of those green eyes, of that deep voice saying she was pretty, of those words offering help if she needed it. Cecily found herself thinking about it at the strangest moments, while scrubbing clothes at the basin, while sweeping the floor, while peeling potatoes in the kitchen. And every time she thought about it, she felt a tightening in her chest, a mixture of hope and fear she didn't know how to name. January arrived, bringing the intense heat of the southern winter thaw, that unseasonable warmth that made the air shimmer over the red clay, that dried the throat and left the skin sticky with sweat. Afternoon rains came violent and fast, soaking everything in minutes and evaporating just as quickly, leaving that strong smell of wet earth and hot weeds. Cecily continued her usual routine, but Leonora was more irritable than usual. Orders had decreased after the holidays, money was tight, and the woman took her bad mood out on her daughter with increasingly harsh words, with increasingly impossible demands. It was on an afternoon in mid-January, almost 3 weeks after that Christmas, that everything truly changed. Cecily was in the yard hanging laundry on the line, the sun burning her back, hands red from wringing heavy sheets, when she heard Leonora's voice calling her from the house with urgency. "Cecily, come here now," her mother shouted. "There are people wanting to speak with you." Cecily felt a chill in her stomach, that kind of instant fear that comes when something out of the ordinary happens. Who would want to speak with her? No one ever wanted to speak with her. She dropped the bundle of wet laundry, dried her hands on her apron, and ran inside. In the parlour, the one only used for important guests, stood Edward Vance. He wore dark trousers and an impeccable white shirt, hat in hand, posture erect but expression gentle. Beside him was Mrs. Helen, his mother, elegant in a light grey dress of fine fabric, fan in hand, fanning herself slowly. Leonora sat in the best armchair, posture rigid, expression of someone trying to look at ease, but clearly not. Cecily stopped in the parlour doorway, barefoot, apron dirty with water and soap, hair escaping her bun. Edward looked at her, and in that look there was something she couldn't fully decipher, but which seemed to be determination mixed with compassion. "Good afternoon, Cecily," he said with a firm but kind voice. Cecily returned the greeting with a trembling voice, understanding nothing of what was happening. Mrs. Helen also greeted her with a polite nod. Edward didn't waste time beating around the bush. "We came here to make a proposal to Mrs. Leonora," he said, looking first at Cecily's mother, then at the girl herself. "We are in need of someone at the estate to care for my daughter Clara, to be her companion, help with her studies, keep her company during the day. My mother is getting older and can no longer keep up with the energy of a 7-year-old child. We would like to offer this job to Cecily, with room and board at the estate, 3 meals a day, and a salary of $20 a month." The silence that followed was so thick it seemed solid. Cecily felt the world spin around her. $20 a month was more money than she had ever seen at once. Guaranteed housing and food, real work, with pay, with dignity, leaving that house, leaving the mother who didn't love her, but at the same time an immense fear paralyzed her. What if it was a lie? What if it was some kind of trap? Why would that wealthy and respected family want her, specifically her, who was nobody, who had no education, who had nothing? Leonora was the first to recover her voice. Her expression had changed completely. The irritation of minutes ago replaced by something trying to be sympathy but coming out false, forced. "What a generous proposal, Mr. Edward," she said with a syrupy voice Cecily had never heard before. "You are very kind, Mrs. Helen. But I have to think of my daughter's well-being, you understand. She is still so young, so inexperienced." Cecily almost laughed at the blatant hypocrisy. The mother who had treated her like a servant for years, who had never shown an ounce of concern for her well-being, now pretended to be a protective mother. Edward, who clearly was not a man to be fooled by pretense, kept his expression neutral but firm. "I perfectly understand your concern, Mrs. Leonora," he said politely but without warmth. "That is why I came personally, together with my mother, so you can be certain that Cecily will be in a respectable and safe environment. She will have her own room in the main house, will be treated with the respect due to any worker on the estate, and will have regular time off to visit family if she wishes. My mother will supervise everything, ensuring everything is proper and appropriate." Mrs. Helen nodded firmly and added that the proposal was serious and that she knew the family's reputation well, that Mrs. Leonora was a talented seamstress and had certainly raised a daughter of good character and manners, suitable to care for a child. Cecily noticed the subtle strategy. Mrs. Helen was appealing to Leonora's vanity, making her feel the proposal was a recognition of the family's worth, not charity for the rejected daughter. And it worked. Leonora straightened her shoulders, chest puffed with false pride. "Well, if you guarantee it, Mrs. Helen," she said, as if she were doing a great favor. "Cecily is hard-working, that I guarantee. She was raised to work since she was little. She knows how to do everything in the house, wash, iron, cook, care for children. She won't disappoint you, you can be sure." The words were a punch in Cecily's stomach. Her mother was literally selling her like merchandise, listing her skills as if advertising a pack animal. Edward then turned directly to Cecily, ignoring Leonora completely, and asked what she thought of the proposal, if she would like to accept the job. It was the first time in Cecily's life that someone asked what she wanted, what she thought, what she felt. Emotion rose up her throat with such force she had to swallow hard several times not to cry right there in front of everyone. "I would like to, sir," she managed to say with a choked voice. "It would be an honor to work at Rosewood Estate taking care of Miss Clara." Edward smiled, and it was a genuine, warm smile that lit up his entire face. "Excellent," he said. "Then it's settled. If Mrs. Leonora agrees, we can pick Cecily up tomorrow morning. She can bring her personal things, whatever clothes and belongings she has." Leonora agreed too quickly, too eagerly, and Cecily understood why. Her mother saw this as an opportunity to get rid of the daughter she never wanted, gaining a connection to the most important family in the county to boot. She won on all sides. They agreed that the next day, early in the morning, Edward would send a wagon to pick up Cecily and her things. He and Mrs. Helen stood to leave, and Leonora walked them to the door, making exaggerated curtsies, saying it was an honor, thanking them for the opportunity, that Cecily wouldn't let them down. Edward and Mrs. Helen said goodbye politely and left. Cecily stood in the middle of the room, still processing what had just happened, feeling she was dreaming and would wake up at any moment. But she wasn't dreaming. That afternoon, after the Vances left, Leonora called Cecily and said with a cold, practical voice that she should pack her things, that she should behave well at the farm, that she shouldn't shame the family. There was no word of affection, no trace of sadness at seeing her daughter leave, no demonstration that she would miss her. It was as if she were getting rid of an old piece of furniture that was no longer useful. Cecily just nodded, went to her little room, and sat on the bed, hands trembling, heart beating out of rhythm. She didn't have much to pack. Her 3 changes of clothes, a hairbrush with half the bristles missing, a broken comb, a piece of soap, a pair of darned socks, the old boots, everything fit in a small cloth sack. She looked around the little room that had been her prison for so many years, those 4 narrow walls, that tiny window, that uncomfortable bed where she had cried so many nights alone, and she felt something strange, It wasn't longing. It wasn't attachment. It was relief. A relief so immense it almost hurt. Folks, tell me something quick. Are you enjoying this story? Leave a like there so I know, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you aren't already, because every week there's a new story here to move you. That night, Cecily couldn't sleep properly. She lay looking at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the house. Gabriel's snoring coming from upstairs, the creak of Leonora's bed in the next room, the wind swaying the trees outside. She thought of little Clara, so spontaneous, so affectionate that day in church. She thought of Mrs. Helen, severe but fair, and she thought of Edward. Oh, how she thought of Edward. Those green eyes that really looked at her, that voice that treated her with respect, those strong hands she had seen hold his daughter with such tenderness. She felt something stir in her chest, something warm and frightening at the same time. It wasn't love. Not yet, it couldn't be. But it was the beginning of something, the first spark of a fire starting to burn. She woke before sunrise, as always, but this time with a different feeling. It wasn't the usual weight of resignation. It was anticipation, nervousness, hope. She washed her face in the basin, put on the blue dress which was the least worn, pinned up her hair with care. She picked up her sack with her few things and sat on the bed, waiting. She heard when the wagon arrived outside the sound of wheels on the dirt road, the horse whinnying. She heard the knock on the door, a man's voice talking to Leonora. Leonora came to the little room and said dryly that the wagon had arrived, that it was time to go. Cecily stood up, took her sack and went to the parlour. The wagon driver was a middle-aged man named Joe, a long-time employee of Rosewood Estate, who greeted her with a gentle smile and said he was there to take her with care. Gabriel and Luke had appeared in the parlour, still in their sleepwear, to say goodbye. Gabriel gave a quick, awkward hug, said she should take care. Luke waved from a distance, clearly still sleepy. Leonora didn't hug, didn't kiss, just said Cecily should behave, work properly, not shame them. Cecily looked at her mother one last time, looking for some trace of emotion, some sign that deep down, very deep down, there was a drop of love there. But Leonora's eyes were cold as always, empty as always. Cecily nodded, turned her back, and walked out. She didn't look back. The trip to Rosewood Estate was completely different from that walk weeks ago. Joe was chatty and kind, telling stories about the farm, the animals, how the boss was a fair man who paid on time and treated everyone well. Cecily listened, absorbing every word, building in her mind an image of the place that would be her new home. The landscape through the wagon window was beautiful that January morning, the sun illuminating the green hills, the winter wheat bright in the fields, birds singing in the trees. When the wagon passed through the gate of Rosewood Estate and began up the driveway, Cecily felt her heart accelerate. The main house sat atop a gentle rise, surrounded by well-tended gardens, shady oaks, colourful flower beds. There was a fountain in the front garden, running water falling softly, making that relaxing sound. Chickens scratched freely near the outer kitchen. Cows grazed in fenced pastures further ahead. Magnificent horses moved elegantly in a large paddock. The wagon stopped in front of the house, and Joe helped Cecily down. Scarcely had her feet touched the ground when the front door opened. Clara came running out, braids flying, face lit with joy. "Cecily, you came, you really came!" shouted the girl, jumping and clapping. Cecily couldn't help a smile, the first true smile in a long time. "I did, Miss Clara," she replied. "I came to take care of you." Clara grabbed Cecily's hand with a trust that surprised her and began pulling her inside, talking non-stop about everything she wanted to show, the kittens born in the barn, the pony her father had promised when she turned 8, the dolls in her room. Mrs. Helen appeared at the door, smiling discreetly at her granddaughter's excitement, and told Cecily not to worry, that Clara was just overly excited and would calm down soon. The house inside was even more beautiful than Cecily had imagined. The entry hall had polished wood floors that shone, quality rugs, finely crafted dark wood furniture, a grandfather clock marking time with a soft, rhythmic sound. There were paintings on the walls, family portraits in gold frames, landscapes painted in oil, fresh flowers in porcelain vases scenting the air. Everything was clean, organized, well cared for, but also had life, warmth. It wasn't cold like the rich house Cecily had imagined. Mrs. Helen led Cecily down the hall to a room on the ground floor next to Clara's room. "This is your room," said the lady, opening the door. "I hope it is comfortable." Cecily entered and almost couldn't believe what she saw. The room was bigger than the entire parlour of Leonor's house. It had a real bed, large with a soft mattress, clean white sheets, a neatly pressed blue quilt. It had a wooden wardrobe, a dresser with a mirror, a chair, a bedside table with a lamp. The window was large, with white lace curtains, and looked out onto the side garden where a large pecan tree stood. Cecily stood in the middle of the room, the sack with her few things falling from her hands without her noticing. Tears came without asking permission, running down her face, wetting her dress. Mrs. Helen, who had seen much in life and understood much of human suffering, said nothing, just approached and put a hand on Cecily's shoulder. "You are home now," said the lady with a firm but gentle voice. "Here you will be treated with dignity and respect. This is your home for as long as you wish to stay." Cecily couldn't stop crying. But now they were different tears, tears of relief, of gratitude, of hope. "Thank you, ma'am," she managed to say between sobs. "Thank you for giving me this chance." Mrs. Helen squeezed her shoulder once more and said she could settle in calmly, rest a little, that lunch would be at noon, and then Clara would show her the whole farm. The lady left, closing the door slowly, leaving Cecily alone. Cecily sat on the bed, the real bed, and sank into the soft mattress. She had never felt anything so comfortable in her entire life. She lay back, looking at the clean, well-painted ceiling, feeling the cool sheet against her skin, and let the crying come completely, freeing, healing. She cried for all the years of rejection, for all the nights of hunger, for all the humiliations. And when finally there were no more tears, she lay there feeling something new. Peace. For the first time in 22 years, Cecily felt peace. After a while she got up, washed her face in the basin with fresh water someone had left on the dresser, and began to put her few clothes in the huge wardrobe. Her 3 changes of clothes looked ridiculous hanging alone in that vast space, but it didn't matter. For the first time she had a place all her own to keep her things. She looked at herself in the dresser mirror. The first time she had a real mirror to see herself whole. She saw a girl too thin, with big, tired eyes, skin pale despite the sun, but she also saw something else. She saw that Clara was right. She was pretty. Beneath the exhaustion and sadness, there was beauty there. It just needed time to bloom. Lunch was an experience completely different from anything Cecily knew. She didn't eat in the kitchen, didn't eat leftovers. She sat at the dining room table, in a real chair, with a clean plate in front of her, silverware cloth napkin. Mrs. Helen sat at the head, Clara beside Cecily, and Edward at the other head. He had arrived from the fields shortly before noon, face slightly sweaty from the sun, shirt sleeves rolled up, hair a bit messy. He greeted Cecily with a smile and asked if she had settled in well, if the room was adequate. Cecily, shy and still unaccustomed to being treated like a person, replied that everything was beautiful, that it was more than she deserved. Edward frowned slightly and said with a firm but gentle voice that it wasn't more than she deserved. No, that every worker on the farm received dignified accommodation and respectful treatment, and that she was no exception. The way he said it, looking straight into her eyes, made Cecily feel that strange warmth in her chest again, that feeling that made her comfortable and nervous at the same time. The food was plentiful and delicious. Fluffy rice, seasoned beans, tender pot roast that melted in the mouth, tomato and lettuce salad, cornbread, stewed greens. Marietta, the housekeeper Cecily had seen the first time she came there, served efficiently and kindly, placing generous portions on Cecily's plate without needing to be asked. Cecily ate slowly, savouring every forkful, trying not to show how hungry she was, how different that food was from the scraps she had eaten for years. Clara talked non-stop, telling Cecily about her dolls, about the lessons she had with a teacher who came 3 times a week, about the kitten she had chosen to raise and that slept at the foot of her bed. Edward listened to his daughter with attention and patience, asking questions, laughing at the funny things she said, gently correcting when she spoke with her mouth full. Mrs. Helen ate in silence, watching everything with those clever eyes that missed nothing. At one point, Clara turned to Cecily and asked if she knew how to read. Cecily replied she knew a little, that she had learned the basics when she was small but hadn't studied much. Clara, with childish frankness, said that then her father could teach her better, that he was very smart and knew everything. Edward laughed and said he didn't know everything at all, but that if Cecily wanted, he could indeed help her improve her reading and writing in free time, that he had many books, and it would be a pleasure to share. Cecily felt her cheeks burn. The idea of spending time alone with Edward, even if just to study, made her nervous in a way she didn't fully understand. But the opportunity to learn for real, to be able to read books, was something she had always dreamed of, but never thought possible. She thanked him softly, saying she would be very grateful if he could really do that. Edward looked at her with those deep green eyes and said it wasn't a favor, that knowledge was everyone's right, and that he would be happy to teach. After lunch, Clara dragged Cecily outside, anxious to show her the whole farm. They passed the garden where bees worked in the flowers, the coop where chickens scratched and yellow chicks peeped following their mother, the pen where huge pigs lounged in the mud. They went to the barn where grains and tools were kept, and where in the darkest corner a tabby cat nursed 5 tiny kittens. Clara picked one up carefully, all black except for a white spot on the forehead, and placed it in Cecily's hands. "This is Midnight," announced the girl. "He's my favorite. You can hold him whenever you want." Cecily held the kitten carefully, feeling the warm, soft little animal purring in the palm of her hand. She had never been allowed to have a pet, never had something that was just hers to care for and love. The generosity of that child, offering to share something precious without even thinking twice, touched Cecily deeply. "Thank you, Clara," she said with a choked voice. "I'll take good care of him when you let me." They continued the tour, going to the paddock where the horses were kept. There were 5, all beautiful and well-groomed, with shiny coats and lively eyes. Clara showed each one, saying names and personalities. The biggest was Thunder, an imposing black stallion that was Edward's favourite. Then came Star, a gentle white mare that Mrs. Helen used for short rides. The others were workhorses, used by the farm staff. Clara said that when Cecily learned to ride properly, she could use Star too, that the mare was very good and patient. They spent the rest of the afternoon exploring, Clara showing every corner of the farm with evident pride, Cecily absorbing everything with wondering eyes. The immensity of the place, the organization, the life pulsing in every corner. Workers passed, greeting respectfully, everyone looking satisfied. No one with that expression of suffering she saw on the workers in town. This was a well-managed farm, where people were treated with fairness, and that transpired in every detail. When the sun began to lower, painting the sky orange and purple, Clara said she was hungry, and it was time for an afternoon snack. They returned to the house and went to the large kitchen, where Marietta was preparing fresh cornbread and coffee with milk. Clara sat on a high stool, and Cecily was going to stand, an old habit of eating standing in the kitchen, When Marietta pulled up another stool and said with gentle firmness that she should sit, that here no one ate standing up. Cecily sat somewhat awkwardly and ate the still warm cornbread with melting butter, drank the sweetened coffee milk, and listened to Marietta and Clara talking about preparations for the girl's birthday, which would be in March. Clara was super excited, saying her father had promised to throw a party with a big cake and invite the children from neighboring farms. The girl turned to Cecily and said she would have to be at the party too, that now they were friends and friends stayed together at parties. That night, after dinner, where again Cecily ate at the table with the family, she retired to her room. She changed clothes, putting on an old but clean nightgown, and lay in the wonderful bed. But sleep wouldn't come. She was physically exhausted. The day had been long and full of emotions, but her mind wouldn't stop. She lay looking at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the night, crickets singing outside, the soft wind in the trees, the distant bark of a dog. She thought about how she had woken up that morning, still in Leonora's house, in the tiny back room, and how she was now, lying in a beautiful and comfortable room, in a place where people spoke to her with kindness, where a child treated her as a friend, where a man looked at her as if she were worthy of respect. It was too surreal, too good, and a part of her was afraid it was a dream, that she would wake up and discover none of it was real. The following days were ones of adaptation. Cecily woke early. It was a habit she couldn't break, but here no one complained she had woken late or was taking too long. She helped Marietta in the kitchen, not because she was forced, but because she didn't know how to stay idle, and gradually learned the routine of the house. She woke Clara at 7:30, helped the girl dress and comb her hair, had breakfast with her on the veranda while the sun rose illuminating the hills. Then came lessons with the teacher, Mrs. Amelia, a serious but fair lady who taught Clara reading, writing, and arithmetic. Cecily stayed nearby, helping when the girl had difficulty, and without realizing it she was learning too. In the afternoon, after lunch, Clara had free time to play, and Cecily played with her. They made rag dolls, drew with charcoal on scraps of paper, invented stories, ran through the garden. Cecily, who had never had a real childhood, was having one now at 22, through that child who had adopted her as a friend without reservation. And slowly, without noticing, Cecily was transforming. Her eyes began to lose that shadow of permanent sadness. Her lips began to smile more frequently. Her posture became less curved, less defeated, more upright, more confident. Edward watched everything from afar. He spent days working on the farm, overseeing the planting, negotiating with buyers, tending cattle, all the responsibilities of a landowner. But when he returned home in the late afternoon, he looked for Clara, and invariably found the two together, his daughter and the girl he had brought to care for her. And every time he saw Cecily, something stirred in his chest, something that had been dormant for 3 years. He kept his promise to teach Cecily to read better. Twice a week, after Clara went to sleep, Cecily went to the library, a room lined with shelves full of books, where Edward waited for her with a chosen book. They started with simple things, children's texts that weren't difficult or embarrassing. Edward sat beside her at the large table, the lamp between them casting golden light, and pointed at the words while she read aloud, slowly, stumbling here and there. He corrected with infinite patience, never making her feel stupid, never showing irritation when she made mistakes. He explained the meaning of difficult words, told the history behind certain texts, opened whole worlds to her through those pages. And Cecily, thirsty for knowledge, absorbed everything greedily, asking questions, wanting to know more, evolving quickly. But those moments were also about something else, something neither named but both felt. The physical proximity, sitting side by side, shoulders almost touching, the moment his hand brushed hers when turning a page, His scent, a mixture of leather and earth and something woody that made her heart race. His deep voice, reading a passage, modulated and beautiful, making her close her eyes for a second just to hear better. The moments when she raised her eyes and caught him looking at her, not at the book, and he looked away quickly, his ears turning slightly red. One night, almost a month after Cecily had arrived at the farm, they were in the library as usual. She was reading a story about a princess who saved her own kingdom, something Edward had chosen purposely because he knew she liked stories where women were strong and brave. Cecily stumbled on a difficult word, frowned, trying to decipher it. Edward pointed with his finger, leaning closer to see better in the dim lamplight. "Courage," he said softly. "The word is courage." Cecily repeated slowly, "Courage." Then she raised her eyes and met his very close, too close, and the world seemed to stop for an infinite moment. She could see the details of his green eyes, the small laugh lines at the corners, the dark lashes. She could feel the heat radiating from him, could hear his breathing becoming slightly faster. Edward looked at her lips quickly, and then forced himself to look away, pulling back, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of nervousness she had already learned to recognize. "Sorry," he said with a hoarse voice. "It's getting late. Better you go rest." Cecily nodded, feeling her cheeks burning, heart racing. She stood up, thanked him for the lesson, and left hurriedly. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, trying to calm her breathing. What had that been? That moment where she was absolutely sure he was going to kiss her, where she was sure she wanted him to kiss her. But he had pulled away, had remembered she was the help, that he was the boss, that there was a huge social distance between them that couldn't be crossed. That night, Cecily couldn't sleep properly. She tossed in bed, her mind always returning to that moment, to those green eyes so close, to that feeling that something was about to happen, but didn't. She knew it was madness. She was nobody, rejected daughter of a widowed seamstress, no dowry, no education, nothing. Edward was a wealthy landowner, from an important family, a widower who had been married to a woman of his class. He could never look at her romantically. That moment had been a mistake, an accident, nothing more. She needed to forget, needed to focus only on doing her job well, caring for Clara, being grateful for the opportunity she had received. But the next day, when Edward returned from the fields for lunch and his eyes met hers across the table, Cecily knew it hadn't been a mistake. There was something there, something real, something both felt, but neither dared name. And that filled her with happiness and terrified her at the same time, because she didn't know what to do with it, didn't know how to handle feelings she had never experienced before. Sundays were days off at the farm. The workers rested or went to town to visit families. Mrs. Helen and Clara went to church, and Edward accompanied them. The first week, Cecily had stayed home, not knowing if she should go or not. But the second week, Mrs. Helen said she was welcome to join them, that after all she was part of the household now. Cecily put on her blue dress, the only presentable one, and went with them in the carriage. In town, people stared, whispered. Cecily saw some acquaintances, saw their surprised look upon seeing her arriving in the Rosewood estate carriage, stepping down beside the Vance family as if she was someone important. She saw Leonor from afar, in the churchyard talking to other women, and her mother pretended not to recognize her, turned her face as if Cecily were a stranger. It hurt, but not as much as it would have hurt before. Cecily was beginning to understand that Leonora's rejection had nothing to do with her worth, but with her mother's own unhealed pain. After the service, Edward asked if Cecily wanted to visit her family. She said no. She preferred to return to the farm. He looked at her with that deep understanding that disarmed her completely and just nodded, asking no more questions, respecting her decision without judgment. February arrived, bringing even more intense warmth, hinting at spring. The afternoons were stifling, the kind of heat that made the air ripple over the earth, that made even the birds go quiet, seeking shade. Clara and Cecily spent these afternoons on the back veranda, which sat in the shade of a huge pecan tree, where a light breeze always ran. They did needlework, embroidered. Clara practiced letters in her notebook, while Cecily read aloud the books Edward lent her. Edward sometimes appeared on these afternoons, between one task and another, sat in a chair nearby, and stayed there listening to Cecily read, eyes closed, expression relaxed. Sometimes he commented on something about the text. Sometimes just stayed there in silence, enjoying that moment of peace. Mrs. Helen saw everything from that corner of the veranda where she always knitted, saw how her son looked at the girl, and a small smile touched her lips. She knew her son, knew how to read the signs, and knew something was happening there, something good, something Edward deserved after 3 years of grief and loneliness. On one of those Sunday afternoons, Edward suggested a horseback ride. Clara loved the idea and insisted Cecily go too. Cecily tried to refuse, saying she didn't know how to ride, but Edward said it was time to learn, that he would teach her, that it would be easy. They went to the paddock. Edward saddled Thunder for himself and Star for Clara, who already knew how to ride alone. For Cecily, he chose a gentle brown mare named Belle, small and calm, perfect for beginners. Edward helped Cecily mount, his strong hands holding her waist to hoist her up to the saddle. The touch, even through clothes, even quick and functional, made something light up inside her. Once atop the horse, Cecily was tense, gripping the reins tight. Edward mounted Thunder with natural ease and stayed beside her, teaching how to hold the reins, how to use her legs to guide the animal, how to keep balanced. They set off slowly, Edward leading Belle by the rein, Cecily clinging to the saddle, Clara ahead, excited on her pony. They went along a trail bordering a creek, shade of trees protecting from the hot sun, running water making a relaxing sound beside them. Gradually, Cecily relaxed, felt the rhythm of the horse, understood she wasn't going to fall. Edward let go of the rein and let her guide alone, staying alongside in case he needed to help. They reached a beautiful clearing, soft green grass, trees all around, the creek widening there, forming a sort of shallow pool where the water was clear and cool. Edward dismounted, helped Cecily down, his hands again on her waist, lingering perhaps a second longer than necessary. Clara had already dismounted alone and ran to the edge of the creek, taking off her shoes to wet her feet. Edward and Cecily stood there, still very close, and he hadn't let go of her waist. Cecily raised her eyes, met his, and saw so much there that her heart almost exploded. She saw desire, yes, but she also saw tenderness, respect, something deeper than physical attraction. Edward opened his mouth as if to say something important, but at that moment Clara shouted, calling them to see a frog she had found. The moment broke. Edward stepped back, cleared his throat, went to his daughter. But Cecily stood there for a few seconds, her waist still burning where his hands had been, knowing with absolute certainty that what was growing between them wasn't just on her part. Edward felt it too. The question was, what were they going to do about it? March arrived, bringing a subtle change in the air. The first fresher breezes announcing spring was truly taking hold. The farm was busy with planting season, workers moving through the fields, the smell of turned earth perfuming everything. Cecily was completely adapted to the house routine, and more than that, had become an essential part of it. Clara couldn't imagine life without her anymore, followed her around the house like a duckling follows its mother, slept better when Cecily went to say goodnight before blowing out the lamp. But it wasn't just Clara who felt Cecily's presence as essential. Edward was fighting an inner battle that got harder to win every day. He knew he was falling in love. There was no way to deny it to himself anymore. Every smile of hers lit up his day in a way that hadn't happened in years. Every time he heard her laughing with Clara, something warmed inside his chest. Every night they spent in the library, he had to use all his willpower not to take her hand, not to confess what he felt, not to break the appropriate distance between employer and employee that society demanded. Mrs. Helen saw everything with the wisdom of someone who had lived long and understood even more. One afternoon, while Cecily was with Clara in the garden and Edward worked in the study, the lady entered and closed the door behind her. Edward raised his eyes from the papers, saw his mother's serious expression, and knew an important conversation was coming. Mrs. Helen sat in the chair opposite his desk, adjusted her skirt, and got straight to the point as she always did. "You are in love with her," the woman said. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Edward froze for a moment, then sighed and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of nervousness his mother had known since he was small. "No use denying it, Mother," he admitted with a tired voice. "I know it's madness. I know everyone will talk, that the whole county will judge, but I can't help it. She is special. She's strong despite everything she went through. She's gentle without being weak. She's smart and learns fast. She's good with Clara in a way no governess would be. And when she smiles, Mother, when she smiles for real, it's like the sun coming out after years of storm." Mrs. Helen listened to everything in silence, observing her son with those clever eyes that never erred. When Edward finished, she stayed quiet for a few seconds, letting the words settle in the air. Then she spoke, and what she said surprised Edward completely. "And what are you waiting for to tell her that?" The son looked at her open-mouthed. His mother continued with a firm voice. "Edward, you have been a widower for 3 years. You have done your mourning. Your wife would have wanted you to be happy again. You are a respected landowner, owner of your own land. You owe no explanation of your personal life to anyone. And Cecily, despite coming from a poor family, is an honourable girl, hard-working, of good character. Any man of sense would see that. If you love her, if she makes you happy, if Clara adores her, then what is the problem?" Edward stared at his mother, as if seeing her for the first time. "But society, Mother," he began. "People will say I married the help, will say she took advantage, will speak ill of her, will—" Mrs. Helen interrupted him with an impatient wave of her hand. "People always talk, Edward. They always talked and always will talk. When you married Antonia, they said she was too tall. When your father chose me, they said I was too serious. People talk because they have nothing else to do with their lives. The question is not what they will say. The question is, are you willing to lose the chance to be happy because of gossip?" Edward fell silent, processing his mother's words. She was right. Of course she was. But there was still something holding him back. What if Cecily doesn't feel the same? What if she accepts only out of gratitude, out of fear of losing her job, out of feeling she has no choice? "I don't want her to feel pressured, Mother. I don't want her to stay with me out of obligation." Mrs. Helen smiled, a small and wise smile. "My son, I have eyes. I see how she looks at you when she thinks no one is looking. I see how she blushes when you enter the room, how she looks away when you look too long, how she keeps the books you lend her as if they were treasures. That girl is just as in love as you. She just says nothing because she thinks she has no right, that it is impossible, that you would never look at her that way. Someone has to have the courage to take the first step, and that someone has to be you, because you are the man. You have the power here. She cannot seek you out, it would be inappropriate. But you can seek her out, can be honest, can offer not as a boss, but as a man in love. The choice then will truly be hers." Edward looked at his mother for a long moment, and then something inside him decided. She was right. He had to have courage, had to risk, had to be honest. If Cecily refused, at least he would have tried, would have been truthful, and if she accepted, he would be the happiest man in the world. That night, after dinner, after Clara had gone to sleep, Edward went to the library as usual. Cecily arrived minutes later, shy as always, holding the book they were reading last week. But Edward had no book on the table. He was standing by the window, looking at the night outside, hands in pockets, posture tense. Cecily noticed immediately that something was different. "Mr. Edward?" she called with an uncertain voice. "Is everything all right?" Edward turned to her, and the intensity in his gaze made her stop in the middle of the room. "Cecily," he said with a hoarse voice, "we need to talk." She felt her heart accelerate, 1,000 thoughts passing through her head in seconds. Was he going to send her away? Had she done something wrong? Had Clara complained about her? Her hands began to tremble, and she pressed the book against her chest like a shield. Edward saw the fear in her eyes and immediately approached, hands coming out of pockets in a soothing gesture. "No, it's nothing bad," he rushed to say. "At least I hope it isn't." He took a deep breath, as if preparing to jump off a cliff. "Cecily, in these 2 months you've been here, my life has changed. Clara's life has changed. This house has changed. You brought light to a place that had been in shadow for 3 years. My daughter has never been so happy. My mother has never praised you so much, and I... He stopped, running a hand through his hair, struggling with the words. Cecily was motionless, heart beating so hard she was sure he could hear. Edward continued, now looking directly into her honey-coloured eyes. "I can't pretend any more that you are just Clara's companion. I can't pretend any more that these moments here in the library are just lessons. I can't pretend any more that I don't think about you all day long, that I don't look for you in every room of the house, that I don't live for the moment I see you again. Cecily, I am in love with you, completely, hopelessly in love." The silence that followed was absolute. Cecily stopped breathing. The book slipped from her hands and fell to the floor with a dull thud, but she didn't even notice. She was looking at Edward with wide eyes, mouth slightly open, unable to process what she had just heard. Edward continued, words now coming out in an uncontrollable flow, as if held back for so long they couldn't stop. "I know I am 16 years older than you. I know I am a widower with a daughter. I know you came to work here and didn't expect this, didn't ask for this. I know I might be putting you in an impossible position, and if that is the case, forgive me, but I had to be honest. I don't want you to feel pressured. I don't want you to think you have to accept because I am your employer or because you're afraid of losing your job. If you feel nothing for me, if you want to just continue working here as is, I will respect that, will keep my distance, will never bother you with this again. But if there is any chance you feel even a little of what I feel, I need you to know that I love you. I love you for real, and I want to give you not a job, not a servant's room, but my name, my home, my life. I want to make you my wife, if you will accept." Tears began to run down Cecily's face before she even realized she was crying. Silent tears wetting her cheeks, falling on her dress and not stopping. Edward saw the tears, and his face filled with panic. "I'm sorry," he said with a desperate voice. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you cry. I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. But Cecily interrupted him, her voice coming out choked but firm. "I love you too." The words were spoken softly, but in the quiet of the library they sounded like thunder. Edward froze. Cecily took a step toward him, then another, tears still flowing, but now a smile born on her lips. "I love you, Edward. I've loved you since that first day, when you said I was pretty, when you sent someone to walk me home, when you looked at me as if I were a real person and not just a shadow. I love you for how you treat Clara, for how you are kind to the workers, for how you teach me with patience, for how you make me feel important. I love you, and I'm afraid of it every day, because I am nothing, and you are everything, and I don't understand why you would choose me." Edward closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. His hands went to her face, holding it with a tenderness that contrasted with the intensity in his gaze. "You aren't nothing?" he repeated with a voice full of emotion. "Cecily, you are everything. You are strong. You are kind. You are beautiful. You are smart. You are everything I could want in a woman, in a partner, in a mother for my daughter. You don't understand yet how much you are worth, but I will spend the rest of my life showing you." And then he kissed her. It was a soft kiss first, almost reverent, his lips touching hers carefully, as if she were something precious that could break. But when Cecily responded, when her hands went to his chest, gripping his shirt, when she rose on tiptoe to reach him better, the kiss deepened. It became more intense, more necessary, loaded with all the feelings held back for so long, all the loneliness, all the desire, all the love that finally had permission to exist. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Edward rested his forehead on hers, eyes closed, a smile on his face she had never seen before, a smile of pure happiness. "Marry me, Cecily," he whispered. "Not because I am a farmer or because I can give you comfort. Marry me because I love you and because I cannot imagine my life without you. Say yes, please say yes." Cecily held his face between her hands, forcing him to look into her eyes. "Yes," she said with a firm and clear voice. "Yes, I will marry you. I accept being your wife, accept being a mother to Clara, accept building a life with you. I accept everything, Edward, because I love you too, and I also cannot imagine being away from you." Edward picked her up in his arms and spun her around, laughing, a laugh of explosive joy she had never heard from him. When he put her back on the ground, he kissed her again, and then once more, as if he couldn't stop, as if he needed to confirm it was real, that she was there, that she had said yes. Sudden knocks on the door made them separate quickly, still so close their bodies touched. The door opened, and Mrs. Helen entered, and one look at the two, at the flushed cheeks, bright eyes, broad smiles, was enough for her to understand everything. "Well?" she asked with a smile on her lips. "Did my son finally have the courage?" Edward laughed, put his arm around Cecily's waist in a possessive and protective gesture. "I did, Mother, and she said yes. We are going to get married." Mrs. Helen broke into a wide, genuine smile and went to them. She hugged her son, kissed Cecily's forehead as she would a daughter. "Thank God," said the lady with a voice full of emotion. "Welcome to the family, my dear. Truly this time. Not as help, but as a daughter, as my son's future wife, as the future mother of more grandchildren I hope to have." Cecily cried again, but now embraced by Mrs. Helen, being welcomed in a way she had never been welcomed by Leonor. The lady was a true mother, the kind who chooses to love not just by blood, but by character, and in that hug Cecily felt for the first time what it was like to have a real mother. The next day, Edward announced the engagement publicly on the farm. He gathered all the workers in the yard and said with a firm and proud voice that he was going to marry Cecily, that she would be the lady of the estate, and that he expected everyone to respect and obey her as they did him. The workers, who already liked Cecily, who saw how kind and fair she was, applauded and cheered. Marietta cried with happiness, hugged Cecily tight, saying she knew from the start that she saw it in the boss's eyes every time he looked at her. Clara was absolutely ecstatic when she found out. Edward told his daughter that morning, kneeling in front of her to be at eye level. "Clara," he said with a soft voice, "Daddy has news for you. I asked Cecily to marry me, and she accepted. That means she will be my wife and will be your mother too if you want. How do you feel about that?" Clara stared at her father with wide eyes for 2 seconds, processing. Then a huge smile broke out on her little face, and she started jumping, screaming with joy. "Really, Daddy? Really, truly? Cecily's going to be my real mom? Will she live here forever? Never go away." Edward confirmed with a smile, and Clara ran to Cecily, who was nearby, and threw herself into her arms. "I love you, Cecily," said the girl, burying her face in her neck. "I always wanted you to be my mom. Always, since the first day." Cecily hugged that child who had opened her heart without fear, who had been the first to love her without reservation, and swore to herself she would be the best mother she could be, that she would give Clara all the love she herself never received, that she would protect and care for that girl as if she were her own flesh. But there was still something that needed to be done. Edward said they needed to go to Leonora's house, that it was proper to ask for Cecily's hand from her mother formally, even if it was just a formality. Cecily didn't want to go, didn't want to see her mother, didn't want to give Leonora the satisfaction of seeming like she approved or had any merit in it. But Edward insisted gently, saying they needed to do things right, that Cecily would go as his fiancée, not as a rejected daughter, and that his presence there would prove to Leonora and everyone watching that Cecily had value, that she was wanted, that she was loved. So they went, a few days later, on a clear March afternoon. Edward, Cecily and Mrs. Helen, the three in the farm's best carriage, Cecily wearing a new dress, Mrs. Helen had ordered Maid, fine light green fabric that perfectly matched her skin and eyes, hair loose in soft waves, new, soft leather shoes. She was beautiful, and she knew it, felt beautiful for the first time in her life. When the carriage stopped in front of Leonora's house, several neighbours were at windows and doors, curious, whispering. The news had already spread through the town like wildfire. The seamstress's rejected daughter was going to marry the richest farmer in the county. Tongues wagged non-stop, half envious, half incredulous. Leonora received them in the parlour, and Cecily saw on her mother's face an expression she had never seen before. It wasn't love, wasn't true maternal pride, but it was something close to respect, or at least forced recognition. Leonora knew she had lost any power over her daughter, knew Cecily now had protection, status, her own power through marriage. Edward was formal and polite, but firm. "Mrs. Leonora, I came to ask for your daughter Cecily's hand in marriage. I love her and want to make her my wife. I hope you give us your blessing." Leonora, who wasn't stupid and knew how to recognize opportunity when she saw it, agreed with a bow, saying it was an honor, that of course she gave her blessing, that Cecily had always been a good girl. The words were hollow, empty, and everyone in the room knew it. Cecily looked at her mother, and for the first time felt no pain, no anger, felt nothing but a distant pity. Leonora had lost the chance to know and love a wonderful daughter, and that was her tragedy, not Cecily's. She said nothing but a polite and formal thank you, offered no hug, sought no reconciliation. Some wounds are too deep to heal completely, and some people don't deserve infinite second chances. Gabriel and Luke were there too, and were visibly embarrassed, realizing too late how neglectful they had been, how they had allowed their sister to suffer without defending her. Gabriel apologized with a low voice, saying he hadn't realized that he was young and foolish. Cecily accepted the apologies with a nod, but offered no warmth. She had a family now. She had Edward, she had Clara, she had Mrs. Helen. She didn't need crumbs of affection anymore from those who were never really present. Preparations for the wedding began immediately. Mrs. Helen took over the organization with military efficiency, but always consulting Cecily, always asking what she wanted, how she dreamed it would be. Cecily, who had never dreamed of a wedding because she never thought she would be loved, got emotional with every decision, every detail. The dress would be white, in fine lace fabric Mrs. Helen ordered from Atlanta. The reception would be at the farm itself, in the garden, with long tables and plentiful food for all the workers and the important families of the region. There would be music, dancing, joy. Edward was radiant in those days of preparation, always smiling, taking Cecily's hand when they passed each other in the house, stealing quick kisses when no one was looking, planning their future aloud. He spoke of how he would renovate the master bedroom to be theirs, how he would plant a special garden she could tend, how life would be good from then on. And Cecily drank every word, every promise, every demonstration of love, like someone who had spent a lifetime in the desert and finally found water. Folks, let me tell you something quick. If you are moved by this story, imagine me writing it. Leave a like there. Share with someone who needs to believe life can change, that true love exists. And subscribe to the channel because there's much more good story coming here. The wedding was set for the last Saturday of April, on a date Mrs. Helen consulted with the minister as appropriate and auspicious. The night before the wedding, Cecily was in her room, now no longer the governess's room, but the bride's room, surrounded by gifts friends had sent, the dress hanging on the wardrobe waiting for the next day. She couldn't sleep, she was too excited, too nervous, too happy. Soft knocks on the door made her sit up in bed. "Come in," she said. The door opened and Mrs. Helen entered, wearing a dressing gown, hair loose which she rarely let be seen. The lady sat on the bed beside Cecily and was silent for a moment, just looking at her with affection. "My dear," she said finally, "I came to bring you something." She held out a small velvet case. Cecily opened it, and inside was a delicate gold necklace with a heart-shaped pendant. "It was Edward's grandmother's," explained Mrs. Helen. "She gave it to me when I married his father, and I gave it to Antonia when she married Edward. Antonia gave it back to me before she died, said I should keep it for Edward's next wife, for the one who loved him and Clara for real. I kept it, and now I'm giving it to you. Wear it tomorrow, and wear it always, remembering that you are part of this family, that you are loved, that you belong." Cecily cried once again, held the necklace against her chest. Mrs. Helen hugged her, and in that hug Cecily felt what had been missing her whole life: true maternal love, unconditional, chosen. "Thank you, Mother," she whispered, using the title for the first time. Mrs. Helen pulled back a little, held Cecily's face between her hands. "My daughter," she said with a choked voice, "my dear daughter, be happy tomorrow and every day after. You deserve it." The wedding day dawned perfect, blue sky without a single cloud, sun shining but not too hot, a gentle breeze swaying the flowers in the garden. Cecily woke early, was helped by Marietta and 2 seamstresses who came especially to dress her. The dress was a work of art, fitted to the body, flowing at the hips, short but elegant train, lace sleeves covering arms delicately. Her hair was partly pinned up, loose curls falling over shoulders, white flowers interwoven. The necklace Mrs. Helen had given shone at her neck. When Cecily looked in the large mirror they had brought to the room, she didn't recognize the woman she saw. She was beautiful, radiant, happy, looked like a fairy tale princess. The ceremony would be in the garden, under the huge pecan tree that cast perfect shade. Chairs had been arranged in rows, all occupied by guests, farm workers in the first rows, because Edward insisted, important families of the county behind, all dressed in their best clothes. An improvised altar had been set up, decorated with white and green flowers, where Reverend Anselm waited with his prayer book. Edward was at the altar, and when he saw Cecily emerge from the house, walking slowly down the aisle formed by the chairs, his face transformed. He was elegant in an impeccable dark suit, hair well groomed, but it was the expression on his face that took the breath away. It was pure love, admiration, happiness so intense it shone. His eyes misted over when she approached, and he didn't even try to hide it. Cecily walked alone because she didn't have a father to give her away and didn't want it to be Gabriel or Luke, who didn't deserve that honor. But she didn't feel alone. She felt complete, felt in the right place, walking toward the right man, toward the right life. When she reached the altar, Edward reached out his hand, and she placed hers in his, fingers interlacing, perfect together. The ceremony was beautiful, the minister speaking about love, about commitment, about building a life together. The vows were traditional but loaded with meaning when Edward and Cecily repeated them, looking into each other's eyes, seeing there all the future they would build. When the minister finally said Edward could kiss the bride, he held her face with tenderness and kissed her softly, chaste because they were in public but loaded with promise. The guests applauded. Clara shouted with joy, jumping in the first row, and Cecily and Edward turned, holding hands, husband and wife, smiling so wide their cheeks hurt. The reception was memorable. Long tables laden with food, roast chicken, roast pork, rice, beans, various dressings, salads, cakes, sweets, fruits, drinks flowing freely, music playing, people dancing, laughing, celebrating. Edward and Cecily opened the dancing, spinning in the middle of the garden while everyone watched applauding. She didn't know how to dance properly, but he led with firmness and patience, whispering instructions in her ear, making her laugh when she missed steps. Leonor was there, in the back, watching everything with a closed expression. Cecily saw her once, briefly, and felt nothing. Not anger, not pain, not satisfaction for proving she was worth something. Just indifference. That woman had no more power over her, no more space in her life. Gabriel and Luke were there too, more awkward than ever, trying to approach, but Cecily kept them at a polite distance. Maybe one day she would forgive completely, but today was a day to celebrate, not to revisit old pains. Clara was radiant, running from side to side with other children, but always coming back near Cecily, calling her mother now without hesitation. "Mom, come see this. Mom, taste this sweet. Mom, dance with me." And every time she heard that word, something warmed inside Cecily. She was a mother now, not just to Clara, but in the future to other children she would have. Night fell with the garden lit by lanterns and torches, creating a magical golden atmosphere. The stars appeared in the dark sky, thousands of them, silent witnesses to the happiness happening down there. Edward and Cecily danced again, slower now, glued to each other, and he whispered things in her ear that made her blush and laugh softly. "I love you, Mrs. Vance," he said. "I love you so much it hurts." Cecily rested her head on his shoulder and whispered back, "I love you too, husband. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for giving me this life." The years that followed were of full happiness. Cecily flourished completely as Edward's wife and Clara's mother. She learned to manage the big house, to command the staff with fairness and kindness, to receive visitors with elegance, to be the lady of the farm in every sense. But she never lost her humility, never forgot where she came from, never treated anyone as inferior. 1 year after the wedding, the couple's first son was born. A robust boy with dark hair and green eyes like his father, whom they named Anthony in honor of Cecily's father she never knew. 2 years later came a girl, small and delicate with honey-colored eyes like her mother, whom they named Helen in honor of her grandmother. 3 years later, twins were born, 2 mischievous boys who filled the house with noise and joy, named Peter and Paul. Clara, who was now 13, adored her younger siblings and helped her mother with patience and affection. Rosewood Estate prospered under the joint management of Edward and Cecily. She had the idea of creating a school for the workers' children, and Edward supported it immediately, building a small but adequate building where a teacher came to teach the children. Cecily visited frequently, told stories, brought books, ensured every child there had a chance to learn, to have the opportunity she herself almost didn't have. Edward was an attentive and present husband, never raised his voice to his wife, treated her like a queen, like a partner, like an equal. Every morning he kissed her forehead before leaving for the fields. Every night they dined as a family, sharing stories of the day, laughing at the children's pranks, planning the future. The bed they shared was a place of love, passion, comfort. Cecily bloomed in that life, every day more confident, happier, more herself. Mrs. Helen lived for many more years, seeing her grandchildren grow, filling the house with wisdom and love. She treated Cecily like a true daughter, never just as a daughter-in-law, and that bond between them was one of the greatest treasures of Cecily's life. When Mrs. Helen died, already over 70, sleeping peacefully in her own bed, Cecily cried as she would cry for a real mother, because that is what she had been. Leonor tried to get closer a few times over the years, especially when she got older and needed help. Cecily didn't close the door completely, but didn't open it wide either. She sent money when necessary, ensured her mother didn't go without, but didn't offer closeness, didn't offer the grandchildren for regular visits, didn't pretend the stolen childhood had never happened. Forgiving didn't mean forgetting, and Cecily had learned that establishing healthy boundaries was a form of self-love. Gabriel and Luke led their own lives, Gabriel marrying and moving to Atlanta, where he worked as an accountant, Luke staying in town and taking over the general store where he worked. The relationship with her brothers never became close, as it could have been, always kept in distant cordiality, but at least there was no hostility. On an afternoon in December 1938, exactly 10 years after that Christmas that changed everything, the whole family was gathered in the dining room of Rosewood Estate. It was Christmas Eve, and the big table was full of food, laughter, love. Edward at the head, hair now greyer but still the same strong and gentle man. Cecily by his side, at 32, a beautiful and confident woman who bore little resemblance to the frightened girl of a decade ago. Clara, now 17, helping serve her younger siblings. Anthony at 9, Helen at 7, Peter and Paul at 4, everyone talking at once, laughing, fighting for the last piece of cake, filling the house with life. Cecily looked around that table, at those people who were her true family, and felt gratitude so deep it almost didn't fit in her chest. She remembered the girl she was, sleeping in the back room, eating leftovers, being treated like a shadow. She remembered Christmas 1928, when Edward appeared for the first time and changed everything. She remembered the courage she needed to leave Lenora's house, to accept love when offered, to believe she deserved happiness. Edward, as if sensing her thoughts, reached out his hand under the table and interlaced his fingers with hers. He looked at her with those green eyes that continued to make her heart race even after 10 years of marriage. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly. Cecily squeezed his hand, smiling. "I'm thinking that Christmas changed my life," she replied. "I'm thinking the best thing that ever happened to me was you seeing me when I was invisible, loving me when I thought it was impossible to be loved." Edward brought her hand to his lips and kissed her fingers slowly, a gesture he did every day, and that still made her blush. "You were never invisible to me," he said with a firm voice. "From the first moment I saw you, you were everything I saw, and continue to be. You, our family, this life we built together, it's everything to me, Cecily, everything." The children began to sing a Christmas song they had learned in school, off-key and shouting more than singing, but with contagious enthusiasm. Clara joined in, and soon Edward was singing too, and Cecily, with tears of happiness in her eyes, sang as well. There in that room, surrounded by people she loved and who loved her back, Cecily understood she had found her place in the world. It wasn't the place where she was born. It wasn't with the blood family that rejected her. It was there, on that farm, with that man who chose her, with those children who called her mother, with that life she built with her own hands from the ashes of rejection. Family isn't who shares blood. Family is who chooses to love, is who stays on hard days, is who celebrates on good days, is who builds a home together where everyone belongs. And on that Christmas night, 10 years after the Christmas that changed everything, Cecily Santos Vance, beloved wife, devoted mother, respected lady of Rosewood Estate, closed her eyes and gave thanks. Thanked for the suffering that strengthened her, for the rejection that taught her to recognize true love when it finally appeared, for the courage she had to accept happiness when offered. Her story proved that it doesn't matter where you start, it matters where you decide to arrive. It doesn't matter who rejects you, it matters who chooses you. And true love, when it is real, heals all wounds, rebuilds all broken dreams, and transforms rejected Cinderellas into beloved queens. Cecily's life wasn't a fairy tale because it had no difficulties. It was a fairy tale because she had the courage to believe she deserved a happy ending, and because she found a man who saw in her not what she had been, but what she always was inside, an extraordinary woman just waiting to be loved to bloom completely. And she bloomed. Oh, how she bloomed. And lived happily ever after, not because life became perfect, but because she had found people who loved her in her imperfections, who stayed when it got hard, who chose her every day. And that is the true happy ending.